Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today in CCWT's Fall Webinar Series. I am so pleased to bring to you a very accomplished scholar for today's webinar. Dr. Lauren Contreras is a higher education practitioner with a PhD in higher education. With 15 years of experience, her work focuses on the experiences of Latina undergraduate students, student success, and the creation of inclusive programming and curriculum. Dr. Contreras is committed to fostering liberating and socially just educational spaces through her teaching, mentoring, and research. She holds a BA in sociology from Southwestern University, an MED from Harvard University, and a PhD from the University of Denver. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Lauren Contreras. Thank you so much, Dr. Contreras, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure to be able to spend time with you all and to share a little bit of the work that I do. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. And yeah, so I will be sharing more about the work that I've been doing and engaging in over the last couple of years. And the title of this talk is It's Something Out of My Imagination, Latina Undergraduates Envisioning the Future Through Testimonio. And so I will share a little bit more about what that means as I go through the presentation. And so just a brief overview of what we'll be talking about. So this research, in this research, Latina undergraduates attending a predominantly white institution in the Western US demonstrated how constructing and sharing testimonios, or essentially their testimonies or own stories, in the form of a vision board. So you can get a glimpse here with the background. I'll go back to the first slide. This is part of what the participants created, and I'll have examples of these throughout the presentation as well. But how this process assisted them with drawing on their ensueños or dreams to process the racial, class, and gender depression they have faced within higher education and throughout education and society more broadly, to be able to affirm their higher education aspirations as they were completing the vision board, and then to be able to realize their dreams could become a reality, which led to the healing of their body, mind, spirit, which I'll talk more about what that means as well. All right, so just a little bit of background on the Latina experience within higher education and previous research before I jump into the work that I did. But this is just to give you a sense of why I decided to engage in this research and feel that it's important. So over the last several decades, the number of Latinas enrolling in higher education has increased and continues to grow. Latina undergraduates have made strides in higher education because they are resilient, committed to their education, and have agency and a vision for their future goals. They're often entering college with a wealth of knowledge and strengths that they have learned from their homes and communities and families, and they've been able to draw on these assets to be able to survive and navigate higher education. However, it is still a challenging experience for Latina undergraduates within higher education. In recent research, they have reported facing challenges and systemic barriers, including racially hostile campuses where they experience microaggressions and a dismissal of their cultural knowledge. In particular, they report being viewed as submissive, docile, hypersexualized, and lacking goals and not capable of academic success. Sometimes they do internalize these stereotypes about themselves, which has contributed to their self-doubt. However, for some Latinas, this has been only further motivation to prove others wrong and to share that they are capable of being successful in higher education. And so Latinas as well, when they enter college, another challenge that they face is that they're often navigating two separate and congruent worlds, their Latina culture and background and the cultural values that they hold and the community and that they have from their community, and then the college environment presenting different values that are more centered on individualism and things like that, and competition, things like that. So this collision is pronounced at predominantly white institution where there's an increased lack of understanding of Latina cultural values and experiences. Latinas often feel forced to acculturate the process of adopting more white American norms and values such as competition, independence, individualism, and worldliness to succeed in the college environment. Some of the Latina values that Latina undergraduates place importance on are familismo, which is the closeness and commitment to family, including putting family first before individual needs, loyalty to family, and including family in decision making, as well as the value of comunidad, which emphasizes collectivism, caring for, and responsibility to the community. Um, and these can often collide with the other values that are taking place within the college environment. Many Latina undergraduates have been able to connect their goals to familismo and comunidad, including their desire to honor their family sacrifices, be role models to their family members and communities, and to give back to their communities. Through their professions, Latinas draw from their own experiences, skills, knowledge, and abilities to give back to their communities by providing resources and assistance to other Latinas. This has contributed to the healing of their body, mind, spirit because they've been able to utilize their own experiences to give back to their communities. Another Latina value that is important to discuss as well and came up in the study is Marianismo, which emphasizes that Latinas should be submissive, humble, and make sacrifices for others, particularly putting the men in the household or in the family above the women. And so during college, Latinas may feel pressured to adhere to traditional gender roles, which can cause them to experience dissonance. And this pressure can sometimes lead to parental conflict as well as psychological stress. However, many Latinas have been able to redefine their gender roles by valuing both culture and family tradition and their own independence. When their values clash in higher education, they do experience a body, mind, spirit split, which is detrimental to their well-being and causes them to feel distress and isolation. To heal this body, mind, spirit split, they learn how to balance their value systems with those that they encounter within higher education. And so for this study, I'm guided by a few different research questions. So this research study demonstrated how a testimonio as a vision board, so there's an example of one of the vision boards that a participant created, can assist Latina undergraduates with sharing their stories, understanding their oppression, finding healing, and believing their aspirations can become a reality. This was from a broader study that I did conduct for my dissertation. So this is just a small piece of the dissertation work that I've done. But the broader question was, how do Latina undergraduates attending a four-year predominantly white institution define and measure their own success in higher education, and what shaped this understanding? For this particular presentation and study, part of the study, I focus on more of the creative process of constructing a testimonio using a vision board and how that contributed to Latina undergraduates finding healing through processing their aspirations. So the guiding question for this presentation is, how does a testimonio in a form of a vision board contribute to Latina undergraduates' understanding of their goals? All right. Okay. So to go through the theoretical framework that is guiding this study, I utilize Chicana feminism And so Chicana feminism was developed by Gloria Anzaldúa in 1987 with her work Borderlands La Frontera, where she's discussing the complexity of the Latina Chicana experience. And she later extended this work in future writing that she did in another book called Light in the Dark, Luz en lo Oscuro, where she details the path to conocimiento, a process of developing deep awareness. So the path to conocimiento, the ultimate goals are healing and integration of the body, mind, spirit. And so Anzaldúa recognized that as a Chicana, she uniquely experienced the world and often found herself in Napantla, which she describes as an in-between space, a space that is of constant tension, where different perspectives come into conflict and where you question the basic ideas, tenets, and identities inherited from your family, your education, and your different cultures. And so here in the next couple of slides, I will walk through what this pathway to conocimiento that she described is and how it relates to this study and the experience of Latina undergraduates. So she talks about the first stage of conocimiento being where a rupture occurs or a fragmentation. This is when the individual, she says, feels exposed, naked, disoriented, wounded, uncertain, confused, and conflicted. And so this rupture occurs because the individual is moving from a familiar community to a transitional space. And so similarly, upon entering college, Latinas experience a similar rupture that causes them to feel disoriented and distressed because they're moving from their familiar community, family environment into a totally new environment of their college and university campus. And then in the second stage, Latinas are caught between multiple worlds and live in Napantla, which is this middle or in-between space filled with tension and pain. It is where Latinas begin questioning their different belief systems and perspectives and begin to make sense of their contradicting identities as both colonizers and colonized. And even though being in Napantla is painful, Anzaldúa explains it's a place where you're able to experience healing and transformation and be able to see that healing and transformation can occur, though it is not not occurring just yet in the process. She also discusses this concept of the Napantla body, which she described as an imagining body that pays attention to feelings, fantasies, and fiction. She shared how when she was in college herself, she spent time dreaming while awake to process what was going on, to predict the present and to future, and to determine connections between her life experiences. She called these daydreams ensueños, a dream that becomes a reality that develop within Nepantla. And within this daydreaming state, she was able to process feelings, traumas, negativities resulting from gender, racial, or other oppressions. These stories, both those I create and those created for me by something outside of myself, nourish me and heal me, is what she stated. And so similarly, Latina undergraduates find themselves in this similar space where they begin to process their experiences with oppression, embrace their cultural values and assets, and push back on dominant white perspectives and harmful perspectives of the Latina culture as well. And so I'm really going to, as I think about the visioning board process, I see that as a way that Latina undergraduates in this study were able to process some of these feelings and negativities and go through this daydreaming state and be able to see that their vision could become a reality. And so, but in the next few steps of the pathway to conocimiento, the Chicana Latina then begins to create a new narrative and scripting a new story for themselves and their cultural group. They begin to denounce oppressive, dominant, and ethnic cultural beliefs that do not allow their spirit to flourish. And then finally, when they reach the seventh stage of the pathway, it's called spiritual activism. And this is where transformation can occur. She says, you shift realities, develop an ethical, compassionate strategy with which to negotiate conflict and difference within self and between others and find common ground by forming holistic alliances. So during spiritual activism, the Chicana Latina realizes there are others with similar experiences with whom they can heal. And similarly, in this study, Latina undergraduates were able to enact spiritual activism by finding others within the study that were going through similar experiences, which I'll share when I get to the findings part. So during this process, also Latinas begin to see others as accomplices to transform conflict into opportunity, to resolve an issue, to change negativities into strengths, and to heal the traumas of racism and other systemic desconocimientos or ignorances. And and so then transformation can occur and are able to make those impact and changes within systems. So in this case, the college university setting. So a little bit about how I conducted this research before I get to the findings. I did use what's called a testimonio methodology. And so this methodology is very similar to first person narrative research, where you're asking someone to share their story and talk about their story. And so but testimonios are more culturally relevant to the Latina experience. And as a methodology, they explain that the testimonialista is the holder and creator of knowledge, while the researcher is an outside ally. They seek to tell the collective story from multiple individuals who have experienced similar systemic oppression. So they emerge from repression and struggle, and they bring awareness to systemic and institutionalized oppression. There you go. And so then as methodology, again, the holder and the creator of the knowledge is the person telling the story, whereas the researcher is the ally, and then they tell the collective story of multiple individuals. They can be generated in many different ways. The Latina feminist group wrote a lot about testimonio and what that means as they gather together to share their own stories. And often they're told through these first person accounts where you're telling your story to someone else that's had a similar experience. But they can also be generated through poetry, fictionalized personal accounts, interior monologues, dramatic dialogue, novelistic writing, and other forms evolved from the creative process of how to best represent the range of life experiences. So the Latina feminist group, in talking about testimonio and developing this way of studying, kind of left it open to, multiple ways for someone to be able to tell their story. And so previous research has found other ways that people have been able to elicit testimonials in several different creative ways, such as written essays, audio-visual interviews, using social media, such as like tweets and posts that people make there, photographs and visual arts, such as drawings and collages. And so it's just multiple ways for somebody to be able to tell their story other than just, talking to someone, which is very valuable as well. But sometimes, I found through this study that it's very healing and revealing, and sometimes it can be hard to put into words what you're feeling. So having a creative outlet can be very helpful as well. Another part of testimonials is that they also require reciprocity and reflexivity. So with that, I had to engage in my own self-reflection throughout the research process and brought in different aspects of my own experiences by sharing parts of my own story and testimonial with those that were participating in the study. Part of that, I also created my own vision board, which is here. And so I've created many now over the last few years. I've done several workshops around this now, but and I recently did one with my family, which was really fun to be able to engage in this work with them. But in any case, so mine here I created my own vision board to illuminate my personal, academic, and professional goals. My goals were related to academic and career achievement. As you can see at this time that I created this, I was about to graduate from my PhD and I was on the academic job market. So that was a big part of my goals. And then as well as goals related to familismo and my own family, comunidad, how I can better serve my community and people around me, and then my own personal growth and well-being, and ensuring that those were important parts of my visions too, was to ensure that I was taking care of myself and investing in myself too. So I shared this with my participants and, encouraged them to think about what was important to them as well. And I'll share the prompt that I gave them in a couple of slides. But before I do that, let me get to just sharing a little bit about who my participants were. So the setting for the research was at Mountain University, a four-year predominantly white institution in the US. The undergraduate student population at that time, 16% were first-generation college students and 30% were students of color. 8% in particular were Latina students. They self-identified as Latina, Chicana, or Hispanic women. They had completed at least 1 year of college and were still enrolled in the college and currently attending the college as an undergraduate student, and they were open to discussing their goals in higher education. To identify participants, I reached out to the university's cultural center and Latina student organizations. These groups were very kind and shared my study with their membership and just posted it on social media pages and such. And then once more people learned about it, they shared it with other people. So I was fortunate to be able to get 11 participants for this study that I felt represented a wide range of different ethnicities. I had Mexican, Salvadorian, Chilean, different groups represented, and this is how they self-identified here. Many of them were first-generation college students, a couple of them were not. And they ranged from sophomores to seniors, mostly sophomores, but had a little bit of mix of everybody. And then I asked them about their majors too. And so you can see there was a pretty varied majors that they were pursuing. But I would say the STEM fields were pretty represented fairly well in the study. And so in terms of the data collection, and so how I went through this process and talked to the participants. So with testimonio, it does require trust, respect, and collaboration, and for the researcher to be in sustained dialogue with the participant. So for that, it often requires more than one time to sit down and understand their story. There's a lot of rapport building that needs to happen. And so during the first testimonio, I really focused on, and this was like when they sat down with me as more of an individual interview, really focused on building rapport with the participants, asking about their goals for completing a college degree and how their goals have been shaped by their Latina identity. And so then in between my individual interviews with the participants, that is when I had them do the vision board process. And so the vision board, I asked them to create was a physical or digital board utilizing images, photos, text, drawings, and other forms of expression to identify their academic, personal, and professional goals. It gave them an opportunity to pay attention to their dreams and imagining process and identify experiences with oppression based on their identities and find nourishment and healing. And so they did that in between the two interviews. So then the second testimonio interview, I was able to ask them more about the vision board process. So I talked to them about that process and if there were things on the vision board that, I wasn't sure what they meant or maybe really stood out to me, I asked them to explain it a little bit further. And then we also talked about their current college experiences, and I asked them to reflect on the support that the institution was giving them at the time. And so then as well, I also had a focus group process or a group testimonial session where I invited the participants to come and share their vision boards with each other that were also part of the study. And so not everybody could attend due to, different conflicts and commitments, but 6 participants did join in and on that process. And I felt like it created a healing space where they could share and connect and share their vision boards. They often, you'll see through the findings, they were able to relate to some of the things that they had on their vision boards, or they were able to feel inspired by what the other person was doing, or another thing that happened too was that they were able to provide each other resources and support and accountability for what they wanted to achieve. So if somebody was like, oh, I need help with this, somebody was like, oh, you should talk to this person, you should do that. So it was a really great space for them to come together and share with each other. And through this process, I hope that by tapping into their dreams, imaginings, and creativity, the testimonialistas would process their feelings, identify experiences with oppression based on their identities, and find nourishment and healing. So I did provide a prompt for them to go through. And here is the vision board prompt that they had, which I gave to them after that first interview. And it says just, for this activity, you will be provided with a large poster board, scissors, glue, markers, magazines to create a vision board that allows your personal, professional, academic goals. So I did have supplies in case people needed them. But I also said they could use their own supplies and they could also do it digitally. So a lot of them did create it through like a PowerPoint slide or through Canva, something like that. I think I only had a couple that did an actual board. But yeah, and so I said you could paste images onto the board, draw images, use words to describe your personal, professional, and academic goals. I gave them at least 2 weeks to complete it and asked them to come prepared to discuss their vision board at the group testimonial session with other Latina undergraduates participating in the study. All right. So for the way that I analyzed this data, I was informed by Chicana feminist epistemology, which allowed me to reflect on my own history and that of my participants, a unique history that arises from social, political, and cultural conditions. And those engaging in Chicana feminist epistemology acknowledge Latinas have experienced unique experiences based on their race, gender, ethnicity, and experiences with immigration, language, religion, and other identities. It reveals the historical oppression Chicanas have faced based on their interlocking identities and strives to bring in social justice and equity into research. And Chicana feminist epistemology does encourage utilizing different decolonizing methodologies like testimonio because they're able to disrupt oppressive research paradigms that reinforce the body-mind-spirit split. Cultural intuition is also a key component of Chicana feminist epistemology, and it's defined as the unique viewpoints Chicanas bring to the research process. A Chicana feminist research intuition is shaped by their memories, existing literature, their own professional experience, and the analytical research process. So by adopting this, I was able to think about my own background and how that shaped and made sense of how I understood the data that I collected. And so a little bit back about me as well as that was shared also at the beginning. But I have been somebody who has worked in higher education for 15 plus years, and I have worked directly with Latina undergraduates for several of those years. And so that definitely influenced how I interpreted the data. And I tapped into my own cultural intuition to bring the vision board activity from practice into research. So as in my work as a higher education practitioner, I have done this activity of vision boards before with students, and students have always responded really positively and engaged deeply. to share their values, experiences, hopes, and goals. And so considering this, and then Ansel Dua's call to pay attention to dreaming, I felt the vision board would be a great way to have the participants imagine, dream, and put into reality things that may have been hidden before. So let's see. I then developed as I went through the analysis process. I thought about initial themes from the vision board and transcripts. I thought about I things that stood out to me were their identities and how that shaped their beliefs about success. They also talked a lot about the benefits of college as well as the challenges that they were facing within the college experience. Um, and then another big part of the testimonial and process is developing trustworthiness or trust with your participants and also including them in the research process as much as they want to be included. So whenever I developed my themes, I reached out to the participants and shared with them, like, this is the themes that have come up. These are some quotes or some things that I noticed. Do you feel like this is representative of your story? And then they could tell me yes, no, edit this, that kind of thing. So they were very much involved in the process as well. Also collecting multiple forms of data allowed me to tell a fuller story and picture of what was going on. All right, and I did analyze the data utilizing the Pathway to Conocimiento framework. And from this analysis, I noticed how the Latina undergraduates were experiencing and processing oppressive environments to develop their goals, including pushing back on stereotypical beliefs and discrimination. They were in Napantla as they navigated how their identities and backgrounds as Latinas impacted their goals and ultimately reached spiritual activism by finding healing for the experiences from sharing their vision boards and being in community with other Latinas. All right, so now to the fun stuff, which is the findings and what I found through this research, and you'll get to see more of the vision boards and voices from the participants. So by constructing and sharing their vision boards, the testimonialistas or participants went through a similar process as Ansel Dua, who paid attention to her dreams and was able to find healing. The Latina undergraduates processed their negativities of the oppression they faced, became aware of their aspirations connected to their Latina values, and were able to find healing by sharing their experiences and realizing they can make their dreams a reality. So these are the three themes that I will go through. Let me get some water here. Okay, so with this first theme here is around processing negativities. So the vision boards help them to process the negative stereotypes and assumptions others have made about their aspirations based on their Latina identity, such as they lack goals and do not have a desire to further their education. For Jessica, the process of completing a vision board itself was a way to process the harm experienced by historically marginalized students because it allowed her to dream, which she felt most first-generation Latina students did not have a chance to do. So she shared, I'm just not used to the privilege of even to imagine. To imagine you have those images already placed in your head. And for a lot of first-generation students, it's hard to even imagine a better future because for the most part, no one around you has gone to college, no one. So you're also low income. It reminded me of that. I feel the more that I do it, a vision board, things are added as things change. But it's nice to think about the future sometimes. You just don't get to think about that as much. So for Jessica, just the opportunity to create a vision board allowed her to consider the oppression historically marginalized people faced and help her to dream of a different future than what was expected of those who are also Latina, first generation college students, and low income. And then here is M, another participant in her vision board. And so she was, a lot of the participants were aware of the expectations society has of them and were determined to challenge this dominant narrative about them. For example, M, who was from a state where the number of Latinas going to college was low, she wanted to prove Latinas were capable of choosing of achieving academic and professional goals. So on her vision board, which is seen here, she had images of a powerful woman, animals, and several sayings, including work, nothing can knock me down, and plot twist. So in discussing her vision board, she shared, I put plot twist because where I'm from, the dropout rate is very high for high school graduates. So going out of state is very rare, especially to a university as prestigious as MU on a full ride scholarship. I am the plot twist to statistics, and I want to continue to be the plot twist by getting my doctorate of veterinary medicine. Then I put nothing can knock me down because that's always my goal. My saying is nothing can stand in my way. No obstacle will stand against me, and I'm going to keep putting in the work to achieve my goals and continue to work to better my community. So she was processing the negativity she faced and intentionally chose these certain words because she saw herself overcoming these challenges and negativities and wanted to dismantle the stereotypes that others had of her and those in her community. And so the next theme here is deep awareness in Nabatma, which is that in-between space that can be painful, but it's also where Latinas process their ideas and values from their culture and the dominant Eurocentric culture and can see double and from both cultures, and eventually a new identity emerges. So when reflecting on their vision boards, the participants engage in deep awareness of these different values. And so here is Jessica's vision board. So from that first quote there too. These are many images representing her Latina culture and her goals of graduating and becoming a history teacher. During her second testimonial, she shared more about what these images meant to her. So she said, most of this is connected to my identity and my career plans. That's what I said during the group testimonial. I want to be an educator mostly because I feel there really isn't representation in the things we are taught. And if there is representation, it's not good forms of representation. Because I feel for white history, we get to learn about all these complexities and how people were feeling and ways they were surviving in hard times. And we really don't get that of marginalized communities. Most of it is to represent that and represent more diverse authors, bringing more representation. I want to teach history. Most of it's more representation stuff about my identity, my split identity being born in Mexico, but raised here in the US. So it's evident that Jessica was passionate about her Latina culture and wanted to inspire others, other Latinas, by becoming a history teacher. Her desire to increase representation of Latinas in history motivated her to continue to work towards her goals. And so now this is Luna. And so for Luna, this is an example of how the participants were also resisting aspects of their Latina culture that were harmful. And for her, it was seeking out mental health support. She shared how she wanted to honor her family's sacrifices by completing college and giving back to her community. But in her vision board, she had a lot of these different words like help many, multiple degrees, open mind, sharing knowledge. But when speaking to her more in depth, she shared she was motivated to help people with mental health because she struggled with it herself. And she felt that she was not able to talk about that within her family. So she says, I've dealt with mental health and I want to help people. I noticed that with families, at least for me, Mexican families are very about hustle, like work, keep going. Mental health issues aren't talked about or treated. It's just you're being lazy. Don't want to do things. And I just wanted to do something to help people. And I don't really know which career I would lean towards, but I want to help people. So even though mental health was not something prioritized in her family, she focused on her professional goal to become a mental health provider so she could help others. And so the last theme here was nourished and healed in comunidad. So by sharing these stories with others in the study, they were able to create this space where they were to find healing and appreciate each other for having similar experiences, and were able to affirm each other's goals. So this is Sarah and her vision board, and she's talked about this a little bit more. And so she's talking about being in the group session and learning from the other participant, Anna. And she was like, Anna mentioned how she wants to buy her mom a house. I feel that's a big part of first generation culture to give back to parents because they see how little they have I feel it's not common for white students to do that because their parents already own so much. I thought that was really interesting, and I resonated with her wanting to buy her parents a house and giving back to our parents for everything they do for us. That was something I related to. So this like helped her affirm her own beliefs about wanting to give back to her family because she heard saw Anna wanting to do that. And so she was like, yes, this is something I want to do as well. And then here is Anna's vision board. As you can see, she has the two houses in the middle of her vision board there. And she also talked about this experience of feeling like, you know, she was able to realize her dreams could become a reality. And so a quote that Anzaldúa shares is nothing happens in the real world unless it happens in images in our heads first. And so I feel like Anna really embodied this through her vision board with her images of her family's hometown in Mexico, houses, saving money, graduating, becoming a social worker. As she discussed her vision board, she realized how her goals were influenced by her identities. And however, she was skeptical about these goals becoming a reality. So she did share, going off what you both said, was in the group session, there is a sense of, oh, I'm lost. I don't know what I'm going to do in 2 or 3 years or maybe next year. And the going along with first gen students where you're like, well, I don't know because no one else has done it. I'm the first to do it. So I have no idea where I'm going. And for some reason, the vision board for me seems like something out of my imagination because I don't see myself doing it, but I might end up doing it. It's like, oh, well, that's a possibility. So Anzaldúa talked about how her dreams nourished and healed her because she was able to see them as a reality. So similarly, through this vision board process, Anna was able to start finding healing because she started to believe her vision could become a reality. So she still had her doubts, but in the end, she was like, well, that's a possibility. So, you know, she was kind of going through that process of figuring it out. So to start wrapping things up here and the process of which the participants went through. So um, these are the three main themes that I found. And so for this study, the testimonialistas shared their stories of experience and impression and their personal academic and professional aspirations they were seeking. By constructing their vision boards, they were able to process their experiences, be affirmed in their experiences and aspirations, and find healing that could lead to transformation of themselves and their communities. So Anzaldúa explained that a rupture happens when students can happen when Latinas enter the college environment. And similarly, these testimonialistas face that as well. Throughout the study, they also talked about several instances of being stereotyped, experiencing microaggressions, blatant racism, discrimination, which would often lead to stress and this desire to prove others wrong. So they were they were aware of the expectations others had of them, and they were determined to prove them wrong. Yet they also were very strong in who they were in their Latina identity and saw this as a strength and not as a deficit, and wanted to demonstrate that Latinas were strong and could achieve the goals that they had for themselves. And so then in Napantla, this is a place where Latinas began to see through the fiction of the monoculture, the myth of the superiority. And by engaging in the vision board process, they realized their goals were beyond their expectations, and they were able to begin to see their Latina identity as a strength. Okay, I'm actually getting lost in my notes here. So let me get to where the next part. So in Napantla, that's when they began to connect their beliefs about their success to their Latina values of familismo and comunidad. So that's when they were talking about being able to give back to their families and communities. Through what they were doing, whether it be a history teacher, a mental health counselor, a social worker, these different things. They were really thinking about how can these professions and what I'm pursuing in college help me give back to my family and my community. They also, through this process, pushed back on some of the harmful aspects of the Latina culture and beliefs of family members. So this idea that women should be second, that they should make sacrifices for others, they were pushing back on that as well by still continuing to pursue their goals and having these high expectations for themselves. And like even with Jessica, who wanted to be a history teacher, like her family was not very supportive of that actually. And so they wanted her, they were like, oh, you're the first in the family to go to college. You should be, becoming a doctor, a lawyer, all of this and that. But she was very passionate about becoming a teacher. And so, there were ways that they were still pushing back on their family members as well. And then finally, they were able to be healed and nourished in community by sharing their experiences with one another. So they validated each other's experiences and affirmed one another's aspirations through sharing their vision boards. And they inspired each other to continue working towards their goals, to honor their family sacrifices, and contribute to their communities. And so some implications for research and practice, things that I'm taking away from this study is to expand on the research to examine how Latinas understand multiple forms of oppression based on their intersectional identities. So I did feel like, the participants represented several different identities, but I think important to maybe think about how being first generation, as they talked about, being low income, being first in the US. I had some students that were immigrants. And so thinking about how those identities also impacted this experience would be interesting to do. Expanding on this research to different institution types. So this was a private, predominantly white institution. So right now I'm at a Hispanic serving institution in Arizona. So I think it'd be interesting to look at something, the experience here versus a different institution, or even at a community college as well, and what that experience is like. And then a vision board should be considered as a form of testimonio to utilize when conducting research with Latinas. I think it is a great way to be able to tell a story of somebody and for them to tap into their dreams and also to find healing. So future researchers could also consider other various artistic outlets like as photos, drawings, poetry, prose that help Latinas to tap into their dreams and creativity. Um, and then in terms of implications for practice, the findings demonstrate that Latina students' success beliefs are shaped by their Latina values, yet they struggle sometimes to integrate these values into college. So higher education professionals should infuse these values by creating spaces centered on family and community and promoting collectivism. And so they can create environments that are welcoming to family and community or allowing Latinas to share more about these experiences. Um, and then similar to previous research, Latinas are want to support their family members in accessing and navigating higher education. And they're often already doing that by sharing their knowledge. And so being able to honor the work that Latinas are doing to create pathways to higher education for other future Latinas, whether that be through getting them involved in like the admissions process or mentoring process, but ensuring that they are, valued and compensated for that work as well. So it's not an extra burden on them. And additionally, it's important to create caring environments for Latinas to validate their experiences and what they're going through. And this can be done just through faculty and staff providing support to Latinas and sitting down and understanding their goals and their backgrounds, what they're going through. And a faculty should be encouraged to think about ways to do this in the classroom as well as through mentoring and support. Higher education professionals should also provide opportunities for Latinas to share their experiences with oppression and navigating higher education institutions with each other so they feel affirmed and validated. As evidenced in this research, they appreciated the space to come together to share their experiences. In this space, they realized they were not alone in their struggles and affirmed their aspirations. Previous research has also found that when Latina undergraduates have the opportunity to share their experiences, they create spaces where they're able to foster their own learning and nurture a supportive environment where their experiences are valid and viewed as important knowledge. So I recommend higher education institutions can continue to create spaces and programming that brings Latina students together to share their experiences and resources that have supported them in navigating their higher education institutions. All right. So, well, thank you for sticking with me through the presentation. And I'm open to any questions in the chat, and I can stop sharing my screen so I can see what's happening. There we go. Oh, I think we might have some.
Yep.
Okay.
So I'll go ahead and read these for you, Lauren, just so
Okay.
our audience who is watching after the, the webinar can
Mhm.
hear the questions. So this one is from Elizabeth Garza Garcia, and she says, "Hi, Lauren. Great insights with your research. Are you looking to expand on this to extend into Latina individuals navigating their way through higher education as a profession, such as a professor or a researcher?"
Oh, that's a great question. So I have, um, I mean, for myself, I have primarily focused on my research on undergraduates, but now that I am in this role as a professor, um, I definitely see the value of thinking about that. And I know there's been a little bit of research on like faculty members' experiences navigating higher education as well. But I think that would be a really interesting way to learn more, especially as we seek to, I know here at NAU, a big goal is to like recruit and retain faculty of color. Um, and I think this would be a great way to better understand who our faculty are, how they can contribute, what's informing their choices. So yeah, that gives me a great idea, honestly. So thank you.
Honestly, I agree. And I apologize because I probably butchered her name. I'm not sure if it's Lizabeth. So I apologize for that. And I agree that that's a great question because higher ed really does have a very unique set of challenges. And, they mentioned the professor and researcher, but I am in a lot of communities with student affairs professionals because before I came to CCWT, I spent many years in student affairs.
Mm,
And that is a very challenging environment as well. And I can
mm,
see this research being very, very, very enlightening for those
mhm.
professionals. So, yes,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Yeah, and
Um,
actually, that's a good point. Just to
yeah,
go back on that, I
no, go ahead.
actually did a workshop at the University of Arizona with a faculty member who was on my dissertation committee invited me to her class, and it was for higher ed professionals, student affairs practitioners, and we did the vision board thing and the process and talked about that, and they absolutely loved it and talked about how it informed their work. So yeah, that's a great population to work with as well. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, thank you. Yeah, and I've seen it's really interesting because I've seen some of the most hardened, and I hate to say it that way, but even like security people who are a part of a student affairs division, when you bring art into it, they come into it
Yeah.
like, oh, I don't want to do this, but then they soften up and, it's a
Yeah.
great team building exercise. And so, yeah, there are a lot of potential, applications for your research. So, yes, thank you very much for that question. The next one is from, and please keep putting your questions either in the Q&A or in the chat. So this one is from Sarah Gutierrez Thorstensen. And she says, as a faculty member, how might you apply this research to the graduate population? Any plans for more research?
Okay. Yeah. So that's also a great, I love these questions because they're helping me think about how to expand on my own research and work that I'm doing. And so this is great. I have not thought about applying it to the graduate population, but I think that would be another great uh, work to do as well, thinking about folks that are, again, doing this work and experiencing different forms of, I mean, there's a whole other experience within the graduate time, thinking about my own experience as a graduate student and just the struggles that you go through and the imposter syndrome that you might experience in that space. And navigating those challenges as well. So I think that could be very healing, especially because graduate school is so sometimes very isolating and individualized and not in community. Actually, Sarah went into my grad program and was part of my community, so that was great. But a lot of people don't have that similar experience. So I think helping people be able to find that community and to be able to work through some of those challenges. And I think something that else that came out through this study, and you probably noticed it through some of the vision boards too, was just like um, well-being and like centering well-being and just how like challenging that is. And so I think in the undergraduate space, but in the graduate space too, I think that's often something that gets pushed to the wayside is like our well-being and mental health and like because you're just so like I got to focus on this, I got to do this. And so I think this process would be very helpful for people to again go through this creative process and then also find others that they could find community and healing with through this process. So that would be interesting, I think, as well. And then also to see, I think, what are some of the values that are driving graduate students too? Like, are they similar to undergraduates, or is it different as you get and move into a different level of your education? So I think there could be a lot there as well. So yeah, more to think about for sure.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I also think about what I love is I just love how it's very meaningful to the participants because it's culturally informed. Because when we hear about self-care in the larger community, there are all these mainstream ways that are being thrown at us, right? And
Oh yeah.
a lot of times they don't necessarily feel authentic to how we move through the world. So it just I love that you're able to offer this to your students. Elizabeth has another question. She asks, thinking of those who participated in your original study, have any moved into graduate studies in hopes to establish continuity with the use of a vision board as you move through the higher ed journey?
Yeah, yeah, no, it's so interesting because because like I said, I conducted this in 2021, 22, and several of them were sophomores and seniors, and a few of them I do keep up with because I did some of this. So when I was at the this university, I was also working there, and so I knew some of my participants, not all. But there were a few people I knew, and so I was able to keep up with what they were doing and such. And so as I was like looking back at these, I was like, oh, you know what? Anna, she is in a graduate school for social work now, like
Mm-hmm.
she's going to become a social worker. Like, a lot of these have come to be true. I'm trying to think of some of the others I don't know as well. Oh, Sarah, yeah, is going into medical school. And so yeah, I mean these women, these participants were like highly, highly motivated. And oh yeah, a participant that I didn't feature here, but was a part of the study. She's now doing amazing things and going on to what is she doing now? A master's in biochemistry, so like a lot of them are achieving a lot of these things that they put on these vision boards are, at least that I know professionally, have become to be true and academically. I'm hopeful that some of the other things in terms of their well-being and taking care of themselves is there as well. I think so. Like, because with the ones that I do know still and keep up with, I have seen the growth, which is what I love about working in higher education, is that you get to see that continuity and growth in these participants, seeing as Elizabeth talked about with the hopes to establish continuity. Yeah. And so I've seen them continue to grow and do what they have talked about here. So yeah, it might be fun to just kind of check it back in with them at some point and be like, do you remember when you said this and now you're doing it,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Well, being mindful of our time, we are out of time. We are right
Oh,
on the nose at 12:30. So
okay.
I wanted to thank everyone for being here, and a special thank you to Dr. Lauren Contreras. Thank you so much for sharing your research and the outcomes with us,
Mhm.
and your students. You shared your students with us.
Yeah.
So thank you again. And all of you, please, 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 please answer that survey that will come up on your screen after we end the webinar. Thanks so much and have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Take care.